Good morning, brethren, friends, visitors. Glad you're here. If you're here, there's a good chance you're interested in God and in spiritual things, and that is where our focus has been so far, and that's where it's going to remain, on God and on His things. He is truly an amazing God, isn't He? That He's brought us all here in this time and in this very moment to talk about the most important questions of life. Things that have to be answered. Things that if you don't, they'll eat away at you. Today, we're transitioning from really the problem that's plaguing all the generations, but really it had been plaguing me since youth, of relativism, and that there's no truth, and that what is sin and what is righteousness, asking those questions. We were talking about that for the last of December. But now as we move into January, we're going to be talking about faith. That's authentic faith. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But before we do, I'd like to tell you a little anecdote from my life. Last time I got up here, in case you missed it, I want to let you guys know this is something I like to do to give kind of a springboard into the lesson. So, story from my youth. And I know this because this is all on home video. The camcorders, if y'all know what that is. It's me sitting there on the couch, 6 or 7, and I'm just a little dork. Not much has changed, but I'm just sitting there, and I'm waking up. My family's kind of, they're slapping me awake and splashing water in my face, whatever. And I guess I'd been napping for a little too long. And what had happened was my uncle had interrupted a dream I was having. It was a dream where everything was made out of candy. And again, the reason I know this and even remember this is because I was talking vividly about it in the video. I mean, I was going for maybe 10, 15 minutes just about this candy world where the trees are like peppermint and there's jelly beans and you can pick them. And man, I was so excited. And it really was. It was a good dream. And to me as a kid, that place was as real as it could be. I mean, you could tell from the way my face had lit up, and my family was kind of just, patting me on the shoulder and smiling and, kind of letting me go. But all that really was a really sweet dream. It was a fantasy. Now, I'm a small town kid. I don't come from much. If you guys get to know me, you probably know that. I was never really supposed to leave town. And I was definitely never supposed to stand before a congregation of people and talk about God's Word. Nobody ever thought that was going to happen, myself included. And sometimes, honestly, I still find it really, really hard to believe. This is where I'm at. I have this privilege. I look around, I see good friends, I see new faces, some people visiting, and I think about how we're all interconnected because of God. I think about how we're here right here in this moment because of God. But sometimes I'll admit, and I'll readily say this, I struggle with my faith, brethren and friends, and I struggle with that, and I wonder, is any of this for real, or is this just this really sweet dream like I had when I was a kid? And that's normal. I want you to know that that's normal to have questions like that. You see, a large portion in America feel the same way, and they're completely given to doubt. A large portion of the world actually are completely given to doubt. And right now, they're rolling their eyes at the very idea that there could be a real God, that we could have faith. We talked about last month how we say truth is real, and that God is truth. And then people respond and they say, what is truth? We talked about how we say that God is out there, that He's real and He's active. And then people say, well, no, He's not. So when we wrestle with these things, how do we deal with that? Because I don't believe that God is just a really sweet dream and a fantasy. I don't think of God as my imaginary friend or a bearded butler in the sky just waiting for my every command. I don't think of God as some mysterious, unidentifiable energy or force like so many people in my generation talk about Him. Oh, there's just some energy underlying everything. No, I believe God has revealed Himself in many ways, especially in the person of Jesus Christ for us to see. So in the face of this world that's scoffing, God, yeah, right, that's for dummies. How do we respond to that? How do we stand in the midst of a tidal wave and in a culture war that's just pouring onto us? Well, we're going to need authentic faith. That's right. Real faith. By authentic, I mean real. By authentic, I mean consistent. I mean congruent, made up of the same kind of stuff, consistent throughout, logical, ordered, it makes sense. By authentic faith, I'm talking about faith like that the saints in the or in the New Testament, in the Old Testament had. People that were willing to lay down their life for God. I'm talking about authentic faith. I'm talking about faith that comes from the heart, that comes from a vulnerable and an honest place. Faith that's real, that goes all the way down. That's the only thing that's going to carry us through this. That's the only faith that can stand every test. So we're going to be talking about, for the first half of this lesson, we're going to be talking about how do we respond when people ask, why do you have the faith that you have? I have one of the questions there in your bulletin. It says, why do you believe in God rather than not? If you flip over your bulletin on the back, there's an outline with blanks to fill in and some questions that will help your mind stir along with the lesson. You can use that if you'd like. One of those questions is, why do you believe in God rather than not? The first half of this lesson, we're just going to be talking about that. Why does it make sense to believe in God? And then as we go deeper, we're going to be talking about what does that really mean in the life of a Christian. And ultimately, that's going to point us to the greatest evidence of God's existence. It all starts with that belief in God, though. And this lesson is going to be pretty deep, honestly. And we're going to talk about some heavy things. And if I get wordy or confusing, I'll welcome you after the lesson to ask me any questions you want about these things. But these are things that are necessary and questions that we need to wrestle with and that we need to talk about. Because at the end of the day, there is something that's greater than us, that's higher than us. And that's the God of heaven. He's the standard. And I think that we can discover Him when we come to grips with the real source of real faith, which is the real God. When God becomes real to us, when we acknowledge Him as the supreme reality, not just that He is real, but that He governs all of reality. When we understand that, then we can begin to understand. You guys remember Moses in the burning bush. He's asking God, you're going to send me to these people without a name of who is even addressing them. What should I call you? And God responds in Exodus 3 and verse 14. That he says to Moses, I am who I am. And He says, say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. So what does that mean when we look at the depth of it? What Moses was being told by God is, I am has sent me. That I am essentially translates to, I exist, I am who I am, I exist on my own right. By my own existence, I exist. I am. God tells Moses, I am the one. I am the truth. I am the beginning and I am the end. I am all sufficient. I am everything that is necessary. That's what God is saying here. And Moses goes and he responds to that. God's ultimate authority. And he submits his will to that. And God has given us ample evidence to know that He's real. We talked about this verse in the last lesson. It needs to be said again. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. Now, assurance is based on evidence. We talked about that extensively last month, but it needs to be reiterated. Assurance is based on evidence and reasons. Saying, well, why do you have faith? Well, I just have faith. That's not going to be good enough, and that's not going to cut it. Especially if you think about the idea that of persecution, when you're having to reason with yourself and you're having to wonder, is this really right? You're going to need reasons for why you believe what you believe. Assurance is based on evidence. We talk about that a lot. But in the face of that, a lot of folks say Christianity is just small-minded. And even I, before I became a Christian, most of y'all know this, I came out of the world, I just thought, a church building is just full of a bunch of people who are scared. They're scared and they're too dumb to think for themselves, so on and on and on. And that's just not been the case. As I've talked and as I've learned and as I've sat at the feet of good men, I've heard reasons for these convictions. And I've discovered reasons within myself. And brethren and friends, we have to do that together. We have to do that together. We have to look for reasons. The faith isn't meant to be blindly accepted. Faith in Jesus isn't meant to be just blindly accepted. Quite the opposite. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 21, we're actually told to test everything and to hold fast to what is good. Test everything. Don't take what I'm saying for granted. Take it with a grain of salt. Analyze it. See if it's true. And so that's our charge. I think about a guy, his name is Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel's an interesting guy. He actually was a journalist who set out to disprove Jesus Christ, because what happened was he was an atheist. And he said this, he said, if I stopped asking questions, that's where I would have remained. He's talking about his atheism. Now, this guy, his wife started going to church. He's a vehement atheist. He's a journalist. Very career-minded. They had a happy marriage. She starts going to church, and now she's spending more time at church than at home before. Because now there's that 1 hour on Wednesday, and then Sunday she's preoccupied with church. So what happens? You must love Jesus more than me. And the conversations they had, yeah, I do. And that upset him very much. But Lee Strobel, what he did was he set out, I'm gonna make an article. I'm gonna treat this like a journalism event. I'm gonna treat this like a journalism venture. I'm gonna go disprove Jesus Christ. You know what Lee Strobel does now? He goes around giving his presentation, The Case for Christ. He goes around telling people why it makes sense to believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He stacks the evidence. And there is evidence that Jesus lived, died, and rose again. There is evidence for God. This man set out to make a case against Jesus. And now he goes nationwide making the case for Jesus. There's a lot of stories like Lee's. My story is like Lee's. Your story is probably like Lee's if you're a Christian. You wondered. You had doubts. All stories and all conversion and all faith begins with questions and doubts. As such, it seems fair for one to ask, if God is real, if He's really real, and He's all-loving and all-knowing, and He wants us to know Him, then why doesn't He just make His existence unquestionable? Why do we have to question? Why does Lee Strobel have to struggle in his marriage and his home life because his wife starts going to church and he doesn't understand? Why does that have to happen? Why doesn't God just manifest Himself right here, right now, and show His full glory so that we can't deny that? Well, I'll tell you two things. Two big reasons He doesn't do that. Number one, if God did that right now, we would either our free will would be completely eroded and we would have no freedom of choice, or we would just be disintegrated. That's what would happen. God's holiness is such that imperfect creatures in sin cannot coexist with Him in the realest way, being in His presence. But secondly, I'll tell you this. God has revealed Himself in the person of Jesus Christ. And we'll get to that a little bit more later and in the depth of that later. But so as we confront those questions, we have to remember this. God loves us. He loves us so much that He's going to let us have the option to choose to seek Him or to not seek Him. And that's an amazing thing. And this truth needs to be known. It really needs to be known. It needs to be iterated again and again in this culture. God, just like anyone that loves you, is never going to force Himself upon you. Love does not force you. Love is open arms. Love is an embrace. It's not forceful. Love isn't going to shove you down and make you submit. That isn't who God is. He's going to give you the option. So God is love. And so I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you, seek God. And in this lesson, follow along with me in these questions as we wrestle with these questions, because these are very real questions, especially in this generation. So God has done everything apart from physically manifesting Himself and disintegrating us or overriding our free will. He's hidden from those who don't know the truth. He is hidden in plain sight. He's hidden in plain sight. So in one sense, God has made it really, really difficult to know Him. But in another sense, God has made it really, really easy to know Him. It's actually up to us. We can decide, how hard do we want to make this? How difficult do we really want to make this? Well, I think it's hard for some people because we have to admit on the deepest level that there is a higher standard than us and that we are in need, just like we just sang, dependent on that standard. And we look up to that standard above everything else. That's a hard thing to admit. It's hard to confront yourself and say, I'm not perfect. I need to do better. That's harder. But when you do that, I think you'll see God. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 7, Jesus says, if you ask, it'll be given to you. If you seek, you'll find. If you knock, the door's going to be opened. Now, for some people, I think that's scary. I've had a lot of conversations across tables with friends that are atheists or are confused about God. And I tell them this verse, and I say, ask. Just ask. And you know what? Most of the time, they don't have any questions for me after that. They'll sit and listen, but they don't have any questions. They don't want to continue to sit across that table. Why? Because when you ask for it, you're going to get the answer. And deep down, I think they know that. I think they know that if you investigate the faith, that you're going to come out with that answer. So I have to ask everybody here, echoing some of the thoughts from the webcast this morning, if you tune into that, have you really sought? Have you really looked for God? Have you gone out searching? There are questions that we have to ask. Questions that we have to begin with to develop an authentic faith that relate to the existence of God. And then maybe we have asked these questions. And maybe we've looked into these questions. Maybe we need to dive a little deeper. But maybe we feel pretty confident that God does exist. And we have evidences and reasons for believing what we believe. It's not flimsy. But if that's the case, then we need to be willing to articulate that and ask that of others. Be able to ask these questions and work through these questions with others. So that's what I want to do with you all. I've got 3 questions that can expose the God that's hidden in plain sight to individuals. The first question I have for you is this. What is truth? What is truth? That was the question that Pontius Pilate asked Jesus when they were standing across from one another while Jesus was on trial before the Romans, of course. But Pontius didn't really know what he was asking for. I think he was kind of mocking that. But when we ask this question here from John 18, 37 through 38, we can see this. Pilate says to him, "So you're a king?" Jesus answers, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Now, Pilate was sarcastically asking, and in the same way that many people ask today, what is truth? You think you got it all figured out, Jesus? Come on. But his arrogance had blinded him to the fact that the truth was hidden in plain sight in the body of a humble carpenter's son. Now, can we be victim to the same thing in this generation? Absolutely. People can be victim to that. But God is the standard. And so people have said there is no truth. Now, I've been reading a book by a guy named Greg Koukl. He's one of my favorite apologetics authors. And this book's called Tactics. And it's basically about how to present your faith to people in a tactical way. Not just haphazardly swinging haymakers, but being logical in what you do and being considering the golden rule and speaking with grace. And he points out that this view that there's no truth, this view of Pilate, there's no truth. Everything's relative. There's no such thing as truth. Koukl calls that formal suicide. Formal logical suicide. And now I'm going to explain this. And it's a little confusing because it might stop up your brain trying to go in this cycle with me. But if you apply the claim to itself, if you ask yourself, what is truth? And then your response is, there is no truth. If that's your claim, that's your argument, no such thing as truth, doesn't exist. If you apply that claim to itself, there is no truth. Is that true? Then it denies itself. So you see, just using common reason and logic, you can ascertain that there is a truth out there. Again, I'm going to say this again. People say there is no truth. No such thing. But then if that's the case, then that statement's a lie. That statement's just an opinion. It doesn't mean anything. It has no basis. So therefore, what good is it? You can chuck it out. So there is a truth. Common sense will dictate that. But as to what that truth is, we're not left to wonder. Jesus said this. He said, I am the way, I am the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus says, I am the truth. With this statement, actually, I've heard a lot of people say this. Jesus never claimed to be God, they say. And that's just bad Bible study, because obviously Jesus does claim to be God directly in other ways. But here, indirectly, he says, I am the way, I am the truth. What is God? God is the standard. He is the truth. And Jesus proved that he was God because he died. Not only did he die for this, one would think, staring at the barrel of a crucifixion, if you were just making this stuff up, that at that point you would start crawfishing a little bit, as we would say in Kentucky. You would start backing it up. You'd say, well. But Jesus believed what he said. And then he died for it. But then that wasn't even the end. He rose again. And there's a mountain of evidence for that. And if you've got any questions about that, I'd be happy to talk with you about that. There's more copies of the New Testament accounts from that era than like the Odyssey and the Iliad by tenfold. These are eyewitness accounts. There are secular historical accounts of this. That Jesus was born, died, and rose for his message that he was God. He proved it. And the existence of truth is undeniable. The existence of truth is undeniable. And if there is a truth, out there, then whatever that truth is, that would be God. You see what I'm saying? God's not this bearded guy in the sky who's throwing down, ice cream sundaes and new sports cars and whatever you ask for, new jobs or promotions. God is the truth. He's the standard that we can discover by way of reason. It just takes a little seeking. It just takes a little knocking. That's all it takes. But the world doesn't want there to be one truth. And the world doesn't want there to be one way of doing things. A lot of times they try to figure out what's politically correct. How can I toe the line? Right now what's politically correct is nobody can have any objective say on anything. The minute you point the finger and say that's wrong, you get to sit down and shut up. Oh, look at you. You're so cute. You think you got it all figured out. That's how people respond nowadays. They hate the word judgment. You've seen it. You've seen it all over. And you know where I've seen it? Facebook. I've seen it on Facebook. Guys doing like this and their arm tattoo, nice and tribal looking. Only God can judge me, right? That's what you see. And to that I'll say, maybe that should scare you, okay? If that's the case. If you're using that as some kind of justification for living your life however you want, maybe that should scare you. You should consider that. That should instill godly fear in you. And secondly, it's not the case that only God can judge you. Everyone can judge you. And they will. They do. In fact, it doesn't matter how anti-judging you are, you're going to judge. So I think that we deep down know and understand who God is because we know that justice is out there. Don't believe me? Let's look into this a little bit more as we ask the question, what is justice? This is our second evidence for God's existence. Justice, the existence of justice. Right and wrong. Is there such a thing? Concerned citizens want to know. And why? Well, some people are right-hearted and well-intentioned, but others, they just want to see how close they can get to the line and what they can get away with, right? Well, what does everybody else around me think about this? Can I get away with this? If the culture gives the green light, can I do this? So they say justice isn't real. But is justice real? Is it true with a capital T? Can we figure that out? Of course, one could intellectually say there is no such thing as right or wrong. Earlier, I talked about the idea of committing formal logical suicide, that if you apply the claim to itself, it defeats itself. Now, the claim that there's no such thing as justice, aka no God, no standard, if you apply that to itself, it can be consistent, but then when you apply that to your life, you're going to be inconsistent. This view commits what I would call practical suicide, right? Or Greg Kokel would call practical suicide. When you try to apply it to your life, you can't measure up. When you try to say don't judge, or who are you to judge, here's a suggestion. When you hear somebody say this, they say, there's no such thing as right or wrong. You're sitting here talking to your buddy and they're, it's just everybody's opinion. Everybody has their own opinions, right? And I just don't agree, and that's okay. We can just go our separate ways. I want you to just uppercut them right in the stomach. Watch them immediately violate their standard. Why'd you do that, man? They're going to be upset, snatch their smartphone out of their hand and run off. They're going to start calling the cops. Why? Because there's a perceived absolute wrong there. You've done me wrong. Otherwise, me uppercutting my friend in the stomach is just a matter of opinion. That's just a matter of opinion. He can't complain. I thought I was doing the right thing, man. You just looked like you needed to be humbled in that moment. I mean, So you think about that. You think about that, and you think about how you try to apply that idea to life. What does life look like? Can you have police? Can you have a justice system? Can you have courts? Can you have government? Actually, can you have anything? Can you stand on anything without God? Don't let the world fool you. Don't let the world fool you, because society, without God as an undergirding basis, it disintegrates. It has nothing. It's built on sand. We can't even have justice unless we have God. Why? Because God is justice. He is. So look with me here in Matthew 7. Look with here in Matthew 7 and verse 1, where Jesus says, "Judge not that you be not judged." Everybody likes to take this and they like to say, see, no justice, no such thing. You can't judge anybody. You can't say anything about justice. Well, that's not what the rest of the verse says, see. So Jesus says, with the judgment you pronounce, you're going to be judged. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, he says. First take the log of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So the one who says there's no justice, well, what they've done is, now they've elevated themselves to a position of God. Inadvertently. Now don't get me wrong. I don't want to be mistaken with this when I say this. I have friends who don't believe in God. And some of those people are awesome. Or I wouldn't be friends with them. I think they're great people, good moral people, a lot of them. Well-intentioned people. There are plenty of people outside the faith. And some are better morally than most Christians, right? So then, what do I mean by this? I mean, without God, how do you make this consistently and logically? Now, I'm not saying that these people are evil and they don't understand what goodness is. I think they know deep down what goodness is, because they know that there's a God deep down. But yet you can't ground your position logically that there is justice. Because if it's all just a matter of opinions, then whenever I try to make an argument against anything or for anything, well, then I'm claiming to be the standard of justice. I'm sitting in God's chair and I'm saying I am the objective standard of justice. Or the other alternative is nothing that I'm saying matters. It's all hot air. It has no weight. It's not objective. It's just an opinion. And I don't care what your opinion is about X, Y, or Z at the end of the day. If it's all just opinions, I can just live however I want, and I don't care about anybody else. In fact, if the police officer's arresting me, I can say, "Officer, I know you think I did something wrong here, but that's just your opinion." Society doesn't work like that. Society, the world knows that justice exists, but they don't find the source. Why? Because they suppress the knowledge of that source. They don't want to acknowledge it fully, but they want it when it's convenient. They want God like a McDonald's drive-thru. They want to steal from God. They want to take as much as they can, like these ideas of truth and justice, and take it as far as they can go up until the point where they become under condemnation. That's hypocritical. That's bad. But again, there are plenty of good and moral people out there, but they need to acknowledge this truth. And I need to acknowledge this truth in my life. That Deuteronomy 32 and verse 4, that God is the rock. His work is perfect. All his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity. Just and upright is he. Now what I want you to do is I want you to picture our society. I'm giving a flat earth imagery, but don't take me as a flat earther, okay? I want you to picture our society with all the things that you love. Your family structure. The police that keep you safe and make you feel okay. The homes that you live in. All the insurance that you have on your various properties. All your job. Everything that you have and everything you ever will have. Sports and recreation, fun, entertainment. All this would disintegrate completely without God. He's the rock. This society that we live on, without the understanding of truth and justice, which originate with God, will erode. Inevitably, they'll erode. So the world, really, it's not a leap of faith to believe in a God that is true and is just. In fact, we all know that he's real. You just have to look and you have to seek and you have to turn over some rocks to find that. But finally, this is probably the strongest of the three that we have questions that lead to the existence of God. And that is, why is there creation? Why is there something rather than nothing? Romans chapter 1 and verse 20 through 21, we've talked about this verse a lot and we need to talk about it some more. It says, his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. Who's they? The people that are outside of God. We were once they, right? So 2, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Without excuse, Paul. Futile, Paul. Those are strong words. But Paul wasn't hurling insults when he said this. He wasn't just mudslinging like we see in the political world. No, he was actually making a profound statement about logic and reason, that if you just thought this through, you could discover this. And that's been my plea for this entire sermon. Can we just use reason? Come, let us reason together to find God. And I think this is the most common sense conclusion that I could possibly offer. If you have creation, then there must be a creator. No creator, no creation. Bottom line. You cannot have something come from nothing. That's science. Everything came from everywhere. We have never observed, for those that are scientifically minded, we have never ever observed something appear from an absolute nothing. Now, I know you run into a problem. People say, well, actually, I can explain all this without God. It's the Big Bang, right? It's the Big Bang. That's where it all started. Okay, let me break down this Big Bang thing real quick. Singularity holds space, time, and matter in it, tightly wound into a ball. All right? Now let me ask you this. Space, time, and matter are all chunked into this little ball. This super heavy, super dense ball. Is that something? Is that something? Yes, that is something. So where did that come from? Did that come from nothing? Maybe there was a singularity. And maybe there was a Big Bang. In fact, I think there was a Big Bang. I just think I know who banged it. I think I know what happened. I think I know where it exploded from. I think it was God. The personal interaction of God. Space, matter, and time. Think about it. Space, matter, and time. Whatever created those things has to be without any space, infinite, okay? Without any matter, okay? Immaterial, like a spiritual being, and outside of time. What is that? That's the God of the Bible. We had space, matter, and time wrapped up in a ball. Those came from somewhere. They came from God. A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, powerful God who could switch the lights on. The Creator has to be higher than the thing that it creates. If we see a painting, we say, oh, someone painted that. So why is it that it's so difficult for us to understand that when there's a creation, there must be a Creator? We're standing in it right now. You want God to show himself? You want him to give you evidence for his existence? Look around. There's your evidence. And so I think you can understand by this point, so in one sense, we kind of all know God is out there. People just like to steal little bits and pieces that they like truth, like justice, like living here, taking breath, being in creation. But they don't know that they're doing that. So our charge is to use these kind of arguments to help them. But I really think there's an even stronger evidence than all these three things combined, really. And I'm going to tell you what that is. I think the greatest evidence for God is in the redeemed life of a Christian. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 11. It says in Revelation 12 and verse 11 that they have conquered him, that being Satan, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Okay? So we talked about before, in the theme that we're talking about in this vision plan, this is victorious faith. And we talked about Romans chapter 8. When Matt introduced the sermon, or the entire series for the sermons for this year, he said, Romans 8, we are not just conquerors, we are super conquerors. We transcend all this. And I think the only way that we can help people to understand is to conquer ourselves first. In that Romans 8 passage I was talking about before, Paul said, I am persuaded that nothing can separate us from the love of God. The first thing that a Christian can do to evidence for God is that we can be certain of God's promises. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15 says, in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. To make a defense, to give an answer. So, Christian or not, maybe you have questions. That's normal, like I said in the beginning. We all have questions, but the answers are available. Maybe you wonder what the truth is. Maybe you wonder right from wrong. Maybe sometimes you wondered about the creation of the world. How did God do that? That's okay. That's okay. But a Christian has answers, and we're confident in those answers, and we grow in those answers, and we understand those so that we can help other people. So that's how you evidence for God. You're ready to give answers, and you're certain about those, and you've thought them through. Romans chapter 15 and verse 13 says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing. Joy and peace. So that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. Joy, peace, hope. Where does that come from? Answers. I'm going to use a metaphor. Here's a sports metaphor, okay? Paul talked about being a boxer, so there's my authority for this, okay? So you're in a fight, right? If I haven't trained at all, if my nervous system doesn't know what to do when I start getting hit, I start flinching and I don't do the right thing. But if I have trained myself, then when I get the questions are sent at me, I know the answers. I know how to respond. And that's one way that a Christian can evidence for God, is that when people are asking you questions, you can confidently and assuredly say that God is real. Another evidence that Christianity has, that we can find in the life of a Christian, is that we are just. Not all the time, but a Christian understands fundamentally right and wrong. You know, we have a place we can go where we can ground ourselves, where we can say, Hitler, that was wrong. That was objectively wrong. It's not an opinion. It's true. Stalin was wrong. Jeffrey Epstein was wrong. All of that, wrong, bad. And we know what's right in comparison in Jesus. How his life perfectly illustrates what is good and what is true and what is pure. Sometimes living this out for people, it can preach a louder sermon than the first half where I just logically describe what justice is. Those two go together, you see. Matthew 5 and verse 16, we're told in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And ultimately what that does is that points people back to God. And the greatest evidence for God is the recreated life of a Christian. So we talked about truth. A Christian knows the truth. They know the answers to the questions. A Christian is just in the sense that we walk by faith and we know that there is a right and a wrong and we live by that standard. We abhor evil and selfishness and try to be selfless like Jesus. And we subscribe to that. But ultimately, I think the strongest evidence that we can show is rebellion. Now, what do I mean by rebellion? Not rebellion against God. When I debated, I went back and forth about this. I thought about putting a picture of myself on the screen from when I was in like early high school, late middle school, but I decided against it because it's so horrific, and I didn't want to scare you guys. But I mean, I was a punk, all black all the time. You know, looking all sad and mopey and angsty and just mad at the world. And whatever there was, I would rebel against it. I didn't know what I was really rebelling against, just everything. Just kind of rebelling against everything, okay? So while I think that was a little misguided, I know why I did that. I didn't know God. I just knew that the world was really messed up and I didn't want to be a part of it. So I wanted to do whatever the world's doing, I'm going to just do the opposite, right? That's the way kids think. So now I understand more clearly, yes, the world is really messed up. And I do need to rebel. But what I need to rebel against is the God of this world, lowercase g, Satan. Paul calls Satan the God of this world. Why? Because in the world, Satan has dominion. In homes that do not have God, Satan does have dominion over that. In minds and in hearts, Satan has dominion over that. And we need to acknowledge that and understand that. These people are captive. We were once captive, if we're a Christian. So we don't need to be conformed to that. We don't need to fall in line with that. Romans 12 tells us that. Do not be conformed to this world, chapter 12 and verse 2, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, by testing that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, what is acceptable, and what is perfect. Christian has a few things that the world does not. We have objectivity, we have a standard in God, but not only that, we have purpose that comes from the standard that we're recreated. We have solid ground to stand on and a defined pathway home to heaven. We are delivered from the darkness of doubt and hypocrisy and pain and confusion, from wondering, is there truth and is there justice and what's my purpose? We know that. Everything else in creation points to God automatically. The hills and the valleys and the skies and every living and breathing thing that walks or crawls upon the earth, everything that's flying above our heads right now, all of those things preach loudly to the immense glory of God. And yet, we're the only ones that can choose to rebel or not against God. We're the only things that testify against God, humans. Why is that? Because God has blessed us so much with love and freedom of choice. People are the only beings that can deny their own creation. But when we don't, when we choose to acknowledge our Creator, that's when we become the strongest evidence for God. Because we're made in His image. And when we are good, when we are serving our purpose in this life, then it's undeniable. Something's different about that person. And then we use that to point people to Christ. Again, one more time, this verse, Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10. We are His workmanship, or some translations render that masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. If creation as a whole is a strong evidence for God, and it is, then we are part of that creation, and we can sing and glorify and preach and walk and talk the glory of God for all of our days, and then we can rest assured that greater than the hills and greater than the valleys and the skies and the cosmos and all the expanse of everything and the sun that's in the sky, we can testify to the glory of God. And He deserves the praise. And it sounds far-fetched, but that's the only way to win. The only way to win the game of life is to step off the board. Jesus said, if you want to keep your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life, you're going to keep it. When you take your life and you surrender it and you give it up to God, every aspect, your time, your energy, your life, your devotion becomes God's, then that's what's going to happen. You're going to preach a sermon with your actions and with your life, and your entire life is going to be a prayer of praise to God. I want to use my own evidence of my own life for you now as we come to a close in this lesson. I was nothing, unworthy of God. I was in open rebellion. I was selfish. I was Machiavellian. I would undercut anyone that I could and bully anyone that I could to get what I wanted. Drugs, sex, violence, whatever you want, you name it. Respect, approval of others, money. That's what I wanted. That's what made my head spin. And if you would have been able to open up my heart and see what was inside of it, it would have made you sick. But now, I'm being recreated. And you can be recreated. All you have to do is find God. So as I ask you this, I want to know, do you really know the truth? Do you know the God of heaven? Have you sought Him earnestly? And have you put everything on the cross? Jesus talked about, you think about the rich young ruler. He said, I have great possessions. He went away sorrowful because he had so much stuff he couldn't give up. If you think about people like Peter, who they left their entire family to walk after Jesus. They gave their lives to follow Him. That's authentic faith. That's real faith. That's strong faith in a real God. Do you have that kind of faith? And I'll tell you this personally, I don't always. Sometimes I struggle and sometimes I have doubts, and it's okay that you do. No matter what your state is, whether you have doubts or you are 100% sure that God is, it doesn't matter. In a moment, I'm going to be standing right over here, and with whatever need that you may have, I know, and I can personally say, I and this congregation will do whatever we can to meet that need because we love you and we want to evidence God to you. All you got to do is just come forward as we stand and as we sing.